for Moriata.
Thank you. It's with sadness that I rise to support the motion. But the example of Steele Hall is to us all an opportunity to reflect on the principles he espoused, the philosophies that he believed in, and the legacy that he created, the example of which should inspire us all and encourage us all in the work we do and all those who are in public office and public life. Steele Hall's political career lasted from 1959 to 1996 with gaps at certain points. His engagement in the Liberal Party continued for most of the rest of his life thereafter. His support for Joan was one that I became very familiar with because I met Steele Hall for the first time in the room that now forms my office in what was then Joan's reception area when I did some volunteer work and support for her. Steele was a support to Joan throughout that period. Steele was a generous sage, somebody who was kind and generous with his time to a 17 or 18-year-old boy who was given the opportunity to learn something from him. I wish I'd spent more time talking to him. But as a 17 or an 18 or a 19-year-old young person, you don't always appreciate those opportunities when they're given. Joan, to you, to Ben and Alexia, to all of Steele's family, I offer my most sincere and deep condolences. I know what an extraordinary life Steele led and the extraordinary love that he had for his family. Steele was a giant for South Australian and Australian politics, and I agree with everything that has been said by the Premier, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Member for West Torrens. He was significant in the roles that he held and in which the way in which he used those roles as an avenue for service, for his community, for our state and for our nation. Throughout his career, he expressed principle, purpose and achievement. Many examples of that have been given today. I will reflect on just a couple and one at some length. His legacy in the location of the Adelaide Festival Centre, I think, is really important in understanding the city that we are today. For 50 years, the Adelaide Festival Centre has played a central role in the cultural life of South Australia. I think that as we look out on it from the balcony room of this building, it is inconceivable that it would be anywhere else, that it would look like anything else than it does now. Certainly, I think the public art that was between this building and the Festival Centre may have been controversial and open to change. But I think we all appreciate, and I think all South Australians appreciate, the creation of the Festival Centre where it is. In the foyer of the Festival Centre is a copy of the extraordinary Robert Hannaford portrait that the Member for West Torrens talked about. It stands, the original I think, outside this room. It's an encouragement and inspiration to all Members of Parliament and those visiting who are able to walk past us to reflect on what Steele stood for and what he achieved, that we may all follow in his thoughts. A copy of that is in the foyer of the Adelaide Festival Centre. If one goes there now, you can see some flowers in tribute, and the following plaque is left. Adelaide Festival Centre pays tribute to Steele Hall. Adelaide Festival Centre Trust Board and staff acknowledge the passing of former Premier Steele Hall, who holds significant legacy with the development of Adelaide Festival Centre 50 years ago. Between Dunstan governments, Steele Hall was Premier for one term. During that time, he kept the concept of a multi-complex arts centre alive, moved the location to the riverbank and negotiated financial support from the Commonwealth Government. These decisions were fundamental to the Adelaide Festival Centre's success today. We remember him with gratitude and respect and send condolences to his family and friends. It's worth taking a moment on an occasion like this to reflect that it was not always going to be where it is. It was not always going to take the form that it now does. Don Dunstan had an important role in the development of the Adelaide Festival Centre, in particular the surrounding facilities, why we have the Dunstan Playhouse, for example. I've often wondered why Steele Hall isn't more remembered in terms of the legacy and naming of the Adelaide Festival Centre complex. I took the opportunity in recent days to look over some Hansard. In the back of this room, I'm sure that many of the people in the gallery would remember well, there are hundreds of tomes, historically useful tomes of Hansard. It's also searchable by computer now, thankfully. But for decades, those tomes have been there and they remain much as they would have been left in the memories of those who are visiting today. Hansard, reflecting the debates of times past, one looks at question time of the late 60s and discovers that the questions took more times of the hour than the answers did. It's an interesting read. I encourage anyone to take the rabbit hole that I took. But I found through August, September and October of 1968 the original debates about the Adelaide Festival Centre, and they bear some reflection. Don Dunstan, after the 1968 election loss, had some interest, obviously, in the establishment of a festival hall or some sort of performing arts facility. Originally, Carclew had been identified as a possible site. Some people were talking about Hindmarsh Square as a possible site. And ultimately, Don Dunstan moved a motion in the House of Assembly in August 1968, and those who want to have a look can go to August 7. He said, "We examined whether an area of land at the rear of Government House and running down to the parade ground could be excavated and realigned. We could get the 5 acres. That could be done by taking a small portion of Government House grounds north of the chauffeur's cottage." I think this is the area that's now a car park at the back of Government House for the overflow car parking. And then taking a line down through Government House wall to the parade ground, he went on. He said, "The topography of the site lends itself admirably to theatre architecture." He went on, "It's close to tertiary institutions and could be integrated with training programs in the performing arts in those centres." He said, "Less than 2 acres of Government House grounds, the total site would be about 5 acres. This motion was adjourned. In those days, one would hear a speech at great length. There were no time limits. It goes on for some pages. It's worth the read. And then Steele Hall responded on August the 21st, a couple of weeks later. In opposition to the motion, he said that Government House is a good site, and so is the Torrens Parade Ground. He said, however, that to put a festival hall in between them would ruin both sites. There would not be 2 choice venues, there would be 3 crowded sites, and in addition we should use 3 acres of parklands, by the leader's own explanation. He went on to say, if most people were to examine the broad outlines of the area now and place the hall in question where the leader has verbally placed it, this is Mr Dunstan, by moving this motion, they would find it would virtually ruin 3 sites instead of preserving the values of 2. He said, we do not want this area to be developed as a subdivision. He went on, when in London, I took the opportunity of looking at a series of halls in London, and one thing that impressed me was the waterfront view from the main festival hall. I came back to South Australia intending, if possible, to promote the idea of a waterfront site. I believe there is such a site. This is the site now occupied by the Railways Institute and the Immigration Hostel. Later on, he described the attractions of the site as a waterfront view, easy access to transport, parkland surroundings and plenty of space for car parking. I believe it presents the best site available to serve all purposes in Adelaide. And so it has shown. That wasn't the view taken by all. Lloyd Hughes, Labor member for Wallaroo, said on the 3rd of September, only one site is acceptable to the people of South Australia. If it is not possible to use the site where Government House now stands and to build another governor's residence elsewhere, let us use the site at the rear of Government House where ample room exists for a performing arts centre. And arguing for Government House, Don Dunstan asked a question of Steele Hall. Will the Premier say whether, before he came to this conclusion, measurements were taken from the edge of any possible performing arts centre to the nearest building on the 2 sites concerned in order to compare the likely cramping on the 2 sites? I'm not sure that Speaker Cregan would have allowed such a formulation. Further, what scenic view from what position would be interfered with by the performing arts centre if it were placed behind Government House? Steele Hall responded, I am summarising a little bit, but the direct quote is, the Elder Park site, for its own worth, was better than the site behind Government House. This is the government's opinion. I'm sorry if the leader does not agree with it. Dunstan, in the following debate, highlighted that the Swimming Association of South Australia was very concerned. If the baths were demolished, then the 3 clubs would have nowhere to go. And he said, we are providing a performing arts centre not for people to look at a view of the water, but for the performing arts activity. And that's what takes place inside the building. I imagine that in October when Steele Hall was able to return with a copy of a report by the committee appointed saying that in the unanimous opinion of the committee members, the Elder Park site is well suited to the erection of a festival hall, and so it was. Ultimately, in subsequent years, I'm sure Don Dunstan himself would have come to agree that it was not a bad idea. Steele Hall's memory and his tremendously important contribution to the arts in South Australia and the Festival Centre history in particular was remembered by Stephen Marshall, who was very happy to host, he tells me, a lunch on the stage of the Adelaide Festival Centre with many people associated with the original design and construction on its 50th anniversary just some years ago. Stephen Marshall described Steele Hall as a role model and a mentor. Through his support for Joan in the Morialta electorate, which now I have the privilege to serve, many people in our local area still remember Steele fondly from their engagements with him through Joan's service. And I won't reflect on all of them, but I will highlight one community leader who would be known to almost all present in Domenico Zollo as an example. Domenico wrote, "Gone but not forgotten. To Joan and family our deepest condolences. May he rest in peace, from the Holy Mary of Montevergine Association." Liberal Party members, the Young Liberal movement, of which he was a member and ultimately a life member, many of them have expressed their condolences, their sadness, and their condolences to Joan and family in the days since his passing. I highlight one more reflection from Sue Laurie, well known to many members on both sides. Sue described Steele as a trailblazer of the 60s and 70s, a dear friend to Sue's mother Jean, condolences to Joan, Ben, Alexia and family. I know Joan, I've known Alexia and Ben for a great majority of my life. I extend my condolences. I didn't know the other members of Steele's family. I extend my condolences to them too. Vale, Steele Hall.